My name is Luke, 32 years old, and I grew up as the invisible son. While my brother Matthew basked in the spotlight of my parents' adoration, I lingered in the shadows collecting academic achievements that gathered dust. For years, I secretly funded my family's lifestyle while Matthew got the credit. That particular Sunday dinner when my father sneered, "You'll never be as good as your brother," something inside me finally snapped. I stood up, hands shaking, and said words that had been building up for decades. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt overshadowed by someone else's shine. Growing up in suburban Boston, I was always Matthew's little brother. From my earliest memories around age 6, the pattern was already established. Matthew was 5 years older, naturally athletic, with an easy charm that drew people to him. He had our father's broad shoulders and our mother's winning smile, while I was smaller, more reserved, with a thoughtful demeanor that was often mistaken for shyness. My brother dominated every family photograph, always centered, always beaming, while I stood awkwardly at the edges. In school pictures, Matthew's confident grin showed off perfect teeth, while mine revealed the nervous smile of a boy trying too hard to be noticed. The distinction between us was never more apparent than during birthdays and holidays. On my 8th birthday, I received a basic science kit, while Matthew, whose birthday was 3 months earlier, had gotten a brand new mountain bike that cost 4 times as much. When I unwrapped my present, Mom ruffled my hair, saying, "It suits you, honey. You like all those brainy things." Meanwhile, Dad was outside helping Matthew adjust the seat on his gleaming bike. That same year, Christmas morning brought Matthew a PlayStation with 6 games. I got 2 books and a chess set from the discount store. When I looked disappointed, Mom said, "Books last longer than video games, Luke. We're thinking about your future." But I knew the truth. Matthew's happiness simply mattered more. By 4th grade, I discovered my own strength in academics. My report card came home with straight A's, and I proudly presented it at dinner. Dad glanced at it and nodded. "Good job, son." Then immediately turned to Matthew. "How was football practice today?" My perfect grades were expected, not celebrated. Matthew's mediocre performance on the field warranted 20 minutes of animated discussion. I tried changing tactics. If academics didn't impress them, perhaps sports would. I joined the junior baseball team, spending hours practicing my swing in the backyard. After 3 weeks of training, I approached Dad one Saturday morning. "Want to help me practice pitching?" I asked hopefully. He checked his watch. "Sorry, buddy. Matthew has a scrimmage game in 30 minutes. I promised I'd watch. They left me standing in the yard, mitt in hand. By 5th grade, I understood my position in our family hierarchy. I was the backup son, the insurance policy. If Matthew failed, at least they had me, not their first choice, but better than nothing. This realization didn't come as a dramatic epiphany, but rather settled into my consciousness like a slow, heavy rain soaking into soil. That summer, I discovered computers at the local library. Mrs. Whitaker, the librarian, noticed my fascination with the coding books and showed me basic programming on the library's outdated PC. "You have a natural aptitude for this," she told me, after I mastered simple commands in just one afternoon. At home, I excitedly told my parents about the coding. Mom smiled absently while folding laundry. "That's nice, dear." Dad was more direct. "Computers are for kids who can't make the team, Luke. Why don't you try harder at sports?" That evening, they spent dinner discussing Matthew's prospects for varsity football the following year. He was only in 8th grade, but coaches were already taking notice. For my 11th birthday, I asked for a computer. "Those things are expensive," Dad said, frowning. 3 months later, they bought Matthew a specialized training equipment set that cost twice what a basic computer would have. When I pointed this out, Mom said, "Matthew needs this for his future, Luke. His talents could earn him a college scholarship." I retreated further into the world of technology, spending afternoons at the library where Mrs. Whitaker allowed me extra computer time. I taught myself JavaScript and HTML, creating basic websites by the time I was 12. No one at home noticed or cared. In 7th grade, I qualified for the district science fair with a computer program that predicted weather patterns. I spent weeks perfecting my presentation secretly, hoping this might finally earn my parents' approval. The night before the fair, I reminded them about tomorrow's event. "Oh, honey, Matthew has a big game tomorrow," Mom said apologetically. "The scouts from State University will be there." "But this is important," I protested. "I could win the whole competition." Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Luke, there will be other science fairs. This game could determine your brother's entire future." The next day, I won first place. Mrs. Whitaker attended and took photos, beaming with pride. "Your parents will be so proud," she said. I didn't have the heart to tell her they weren't there. When I brought home the trophy, Mom placed it on the mantel, only to move it to my bedroom shelf the next day, when Matthew brought home a participation medal from his game. The scouts hadn't been impressed. Strangely, I never hated Matthew for any of this. He wasn't cruel or deliberately seeking to overshadow me. He was simply living his life in the spotlight our parents created for him. Occasionally, he'd acknowledge my achievements with a "nice job, brainiac," or share a conspiratorial eye roll when our parents were being particularly obvious with their favoritism. By the end of elementary school, I'd stopped trying to compete for attention. Instead, I channeled my energy into developing skills that would eventually become my escape route. While Matthew collected trophies that cluttered our living room, I collected knowledge that would one day allow me to build a life far from their dismissive shadows. High school marked a significant divergence in the paths Matthew and I followed. While I entered freshman year as an already accomplished programmer at 14, Matthew was heading to State University on a football scholarship, the hometown hero whose departure warranted a feature in the local newspaper. Our parents converted Matthew's bedroom into a shrine after he left for college. Trophies, newspaper clippings, team photos, and memorabilia covered every surface. Meanwhile, my academic certificates and competition awards were kept in a manila folder in Dad's filing cabinet. "We don't want to make Matthew feel bad when he visits," Mom explained when I asked why my recent coding competition certificate wasn't displayed. My sophomore year, I developed a student management software that the school district actually purchased for $5,000. The local paper ran a small article about it on page 17. I cut it out and brought it home, hoping for some recognition. Dad skimmed it while watching television. "Computers, huh? Good hobby, son." The same week, Matthew scored the winning touchdown in a conference game, and our parents drove 6 hours to attend, leaving me home alone for the weekend. That November, everything shifted when Matthew suffered his first major knee injury. Our parents were devastated, acting as though a national tragedy had occurred. Mom cried for days. Dad spent hours on the phone with university coaches and doctors, seeking second opinions. I tried comforting them, making dinner one night, when they returned exhausted from visiting Matthew at the University Medical Center. "I made lasagna," I announced as they walked through the door, hoping to ease their burden. "Not hungry," Dad muttered, heading straight to the liquor cabinet. "Matthew might need surgery," Mom said, as if I hadn't spoken at all. "His whole future could be ruined." For weeks, our house functioned like a funeral home. I tried connecting with them during this difficult time, thinking their vulnerability might open a door for us to grow closer. One evening, I sat beside Mom as she sorted through medical insurance papers. "Need any help? I'm pretty good with organizing information," I offered. She patted my hand absently. "This is adult stuff, Luke. Why don't you go play on your computer?" I was 16, not 6, but the dismissal was typical. In their eyes, I remained perpetually childish, incapable of contributing anything meaningful to family crises. Matthew eventually recovered after surgery and physical therapy, returning to football the following season. He wasn't quite the same player, though. His legendary speed had diminished, and scouts began looking elsewhere for their next star recruit. Meanwhile, I was thriving academically. By junior year, I was taking advanced placement classes and college courses simultaneously. My guidance counselor, Mr. Brennan, became my greatest advocate, recognizing potential my parents never saw. "You should apply to MIT. he suggested during a college planning session. Your programming skills are beyond exceptional. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of education. With Mr. Brennan's encouragement, I applied to several top technology programs, including MIT. The day the thick acceptance letter arrived along with a substantial merit scholarship, I felt a fleeting hope that perhaps this accomplishment would finally register with my parents. At dinner, I placed the acceptance letter beside my plate. I got into MIT, I announced, during a rare lull in conversation about Matthew's physical therapy progress. Full scholarship. Mom glanced at the letter. Massachusetts, that's awfully far away. Dad frowned. Isn't that expensive? It's a full scholarship, I repeated. They're paying for everything. Well, that's nice, Mom said, returning to her meal. Oh, did I tell you? Matthew's trainer thinks he might be ready for spring training. The rest of dinner continued with updates about Matthew's recovery milestones. My MIT acceptance, the culmination of years of self-motivated work, warranted less discussion than Matthew's ability to climb stairs without wincing. As my high school graduation approached, Matthew's football career continued its slow decline. He was still playing but no longer starting every game. Our parents seemed personally wounded by this development, as if his reduced playing time reflected on them. The week before I left for MIT, Matthew came home for a weekend. We found ourselves alone in the backyard, him nursing a beer, me staring at the stars and thinking about my imminent departure. Congrats on MIT, he said suddenly. That's major league stuff. Surprised by the acknowledgement, I just nodded. Thanks. They don't get it, he continued, gesturing toward the house where our parents were watching television. What you do, how smart you are, they never will. It doesn't matter, I lied. Matthew took a long swig of beer. For what it's worth, I think you got the better deal. This football thing. He gestured to his knee. It's all temporary. One bad hit and it's over. What you've got, that brain that's forever. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, a brief connection before our paths diverged even further. I left for MIT 3 days later, feeling both tremendous relief to escape my parents' indifference and a profound sadness that their approval still mattered to me despite everything. That departure marked the beginning of my true independence, a separation not just physical but emotional from the toxic family dynamic that had shaped my early years. As the bus pulled away from our hometown, I made a silent promise to myself I would build a life so successful that even they couldn't ignore it. MIT transformed my life. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language and valued my abilities. The campus buzzed with innovation, and I felt like I'd finally found my natural habitat after years in alien territory. My freshman roommate Derek was the first person to ever look at me with genuine admiration. You wrote this code from scratch, he asked after seeing one of my projects. Dude, that's insane. Most seniors couldn't do this. His reaction was so foreign to me that I initially suspected mockery, but his respect was sincere, the first of many validations I would receive in this new world. While I flourished, Matthew's trajectory continued downward. During my first semester, he was benched for most games. By Thanksgiving, when I briefly returned home, the change in him was noticeable. He'd gained weight, looked perpetually tired, and drank more than I remembered. How's football? I asked cautiously over leftover turkey. It's fine, he answered curtly with a warning glance toward our parents. Later, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. Matthew's having a rough time. The coaches don't appreciate him. Could you talk to him? He seems so lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being the invisible son, I was suddenly expected to fix the golden child. Nevertheless, I tried connecting with my brother, but he deflected every conversation with forced cheerfulness when our parents were nearby. Back at MIT, I threw myself into my studies and side projects with renewed intensity. By sophomore year, I'd caught the attention of several professors who invited me to join their research teams. Professor Harrington became particularly invested in my development, connecting me with industry contacts and encouraging my entrepreneurial instincts. "You have something special, Luke," he told me, after reviewing my proposal for a new cloud security protocol. "You see solutions where others don't even recognize problems yet." That spring, my parents called with news Matthew had dropped out of college 3 months before graduation. They were devastated, their voices heavy with a grief they'd never expressed over any challenge in my life. "He's coming home to figure things out," Mom explained, her voice trembling. "All those years of promise. I just don't understand what went wrong." I bit back the obvious response that they had placed impossible expectations on him while simultaneously shielding him from any consequences. Instead, I murmured sympathetic platitudes and promised to visit soon, a promise I had no intention of keeping. My junior year brought my first serious attempt at entrepreneurship. With Professor Harrington's guidance, I developed a cybersecurity application that attracted seed funding from a Boston venture capital firm. The initial $50,000 felt like validation of everything I'd been working toward. When I called home with the news, Dad answered. "That's nice, son," he said distractedly. "Listen, Matthew got a job at Henderson's car dealership. Assistant sales manager. Can you believe it? Things are finally turning around." The contrast was stark. My first major professional achievement versus Matthew getting an entry-level position through Dad's golf buddy. Yet in our family's economy, Matthew's job warranted celebration, while my funding was barely acknowledged. I reduced contact with my family to monthly perfunctory calls. During these conversations, I offered minimal information about my increasingly successful life, while enduring detailed updates about Matthew's mundane achievements at the dealership. By senior year, I'd sold my security application to a larger tech company and used the proceeds to fund a more ambitious startup focused on artificial intelligence applications for financial services. I was 21, with more professional accomplishments than most, achieved by 40, yet at home, I remained the overlooked younger son. I graduated from MIT with highest honors. My parents attended the ceremony, arriving late and leaving immediately after to avoid Boston traffic. Throughout the celebratory lunch I'd arranged, they dominated the conversation with stories about Matthew's recent promotion to full sales manager and his new apartment. "We're just so proud of how he's bounced back." Mom gushed, oblivious to the absurdity of focusing on Matthew at my graduation. "Everyone deserves a second chance, don't they?" I nodded mechanically, having long since learned that correcting their narrative was futile. Later that evening, after they'd left, Professor Harrington found me sitting alone in the graduate lounge. "Families are complicated," he said, sitting beside me. "But today is about you, Luke. What you've accomplished here is exceptional and your future is blindingly bright. Don't let anyone dim that light." His words stayed with me as I packed up my apartment and prepared to move to San Francisco, where my growing company had established its headquarters. I was moving 3,000 miles away from my family, and the primary emotion I felt was relief. A week before my departure, Matthew called unexpectedly. "Congrats on graduation," he said. "And that company you started. That's incredible, bro." "Thanks," I replied, surprised by his awareness of my business. "Listen," he continued, his voice lowering. "They're struggling, Mom and Dad. Dad's arthritis is getting worse and he can't work full-time anymore. Mom's talking about getting a second job." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously. "I know things have always been unbalanced between us, but they're still our parents." After a long pause, I made a decision that would shape the next decade of our family dynamic. "I'll help," I said, "but I don't want them to know it's coming from me." Matthew understood immediately. "You want me to be the middleman? Tell them you're doing well at the dealership, that you can help with their expenses." "Why would you do that?" he asked. "Why not just let them know you're successful now?" The answer was complicated, part spite, part protection of my own emotional well-being, and part acceptance that nothing I achieved would ever be enough for them. "It's better this way," was all I said. And so began our strange arrangement. I sent substantial amounts monthly to Matthew, who then presented smaller portions to our parents as his own contribution. The deception satisfied something broken in me, allowing me to fulfill familial obligation while protecting myself from their inevitable dismissal of my success. What I hadn't anticipated was Matthew's reaction. Rather than simple compliance, he expressed genuine gratitude, seemingly relieved to finally have something valuable to offer our parents. "They look at me differently now," he confessed during one of our infrequent calls. "Like I'm finally the son they always wanted me to be." The irony was painful, yet oddly satisfying. Their golden child was only meeting their expectations through my invisible support. Meanwhile, I built my empire from a distance, watching as they celebrated Matthew's fictional generosity while remaining oblivious to my actual achievements. San Francisco embraced me with opportunities that exceeded even my ambitious expectations. By 25, my AI financial platform had secured major clients across 3 continents. By 27, venture capital firms were competing to fund my expansion plans. At 29, a global technology corporation acquired my company for a sum that transformed me from successful to wealthy, beyond anything I'd imagined growing up in that small Boston suburb. Throughout this meteoric rise, my family remained largely unaware of my success. Our monthly phone calls continued with predictable patterns, my deflecting questions about my computer job, while enduring detailed narratives about Matthew's struggles and minor victories at the car dealership. Meanwhile, my financial support increased as my parents' situations deteriorated. Dad's arthritis progressed to the point where he needed expensive treatments not covered by insurance. Mom developed hypertension requiring regular medication. Their modest retirement savings dwindled rapidly against mounting medical expenses. Matthew's career, contrary to our parents' glowing assessments, was floundering. The dealership faced decreasing sales and his position grew precarious. Worse, he'd developed a drinking problem that affected his work performance and ended his brief marriage. "It's too much pressure," he confessed during one of our private calls. "They think I'm supporting them, the dealership, my ex-wife. I can't keep up with their expectations." "You don't have to," I reminded him. "I'm handling the financial part. It's not just the money. It's the way they look at me like I'm their savior. Every time I visit, they tell me how proud they are of me for stepping up when things got tough. If they knew the truth." I increased my monthly transfers, allowing Matthew to appear even more generous, while actually working fewer hours so he could attend outpatient rehab for his drinking. The deception grew more elaborate. Matthew now claimed periodic bonuses to explain larger infusions of cash when major medical bills arose. My personal life suffered under the weight of this secret arrangement. A promising relationship with Alexandra, a brilliant software engineer I'd met at a technology conference, collapsed after 6 months when she sensed my evasiveness about family matters. "You never talk about them, but they clearly affect you deeply," she observed during our final conversation. "I can't compete with ghosts, Luke. Whatever you're not resolving with your family is preventing you from being fully present here." She was right, of course. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Marshall, who specialized in family trauma. Our weekly sessions became the only place where I acknowledged the complexity of my feelings, the lingering hurt of childhood rejection, the bitter satisfaction of my secret financial control, and the emptiness of success without genuine recognition. "You've created a situation where you're simultaneously punishing your parents and still seeking their approval," Dr. Marshall observed after several months. "By supporting them anonymously, you're proving your worth while denying them the opportunity to acknowledge it." "They wouldn't acknowledge it anyway," I argued. "Perhaps. But this arrangement isn't healing you. It's perpetuating your wound while creating a new one." I dismissed his concern, convincing myself that the status quo protected everyone. My parents maintained their illusions. Matthew retained their approval, and I kept my distance from their potential rejection. Christmas of my 31st year, I reluctantly visited home for the first time in 18 months. The house looked shabbier than I remembered, small repairs neglected due to finances, despite my regular contributions. Inside, little had changed. The living room still showcased Matthew's faded athletic glory, while any evidence of my existence remained confined to a few obligatory family photos. The most striking change was Matthew himself. At 36, he looked a decade older with pronounced lines around his eyes and a slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide. Despite 3 months of sobriety, years of drinking had taken their toll. During dinner, Mom presented Matthew with a gift, an expensive watch I had actually purchased, transferred to her by Matthew as coming from his latest bonus. "You work so hard for us," she said, tears in her eyes as Matthew uncomfortably accepted the watch. "We don't know what we'd do without your support." Dad nodded solemnly. "Always knew you'd make us proud, son. Always knew you had it in you." Matthew caught my eye across the table, his expression a complex mixture of shame and apology. Later, after our parents had gone to bed, we sat on the back porch like we had years before. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. "Every thank you feels like a knife. They have no idea who's really keeping them afloat. Does it matter? They're taken care of." "It matters to me." He stared into the darkness. "All my life I was their golden child, but it was based on nothing real, just sports and popularity. Now they think I'm successful and generous, but that's not real either. It's all you." "Would you rather I stop?" I asked. "No, they need the help. But I need to get my life together. This arrangement, it's killing me, Luke. I'm trapped in their expectations just like always." For the first time, I saw clearly how our parents' dysfunction had damaged both of us differently, but equally profoundly. Matthew had been crushed under the weight of impossible expectations, while I had been wounded by their absence. Both of us were still orbiting around their approval, seeking validation from people constitutionally incapable of providing it fairly. The realization didn't immediately change our arrangement, but it shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamic. My brother wasn't my enemy or my rival. He was another casualty of our parents' broken value system. As my company garnered more public attention, maintaining my anonymity with my family became increasingly difficult. My photograph appeared in technology publications. Business networks featured segments on my innovative approach to financial technology. It seemed inevitable that eventually my success would become known to them. That moment arrived sooner than expected. Tech Innovator magazine ran a cover feature titled "The Future of Finance: How Luke Reynolds is Revolutionizing Banking Security." The article detailed my journey from self-taught programmer to industry leader, complete with photographs and personal background information they'd gleaned from public records. Matthew called the day the magazine hit newsstands. "It's everywhere, Luke. Someone at the dealership brought it in. People are asking if I'm related to you." I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with anxiety. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that you're my brilliant little brother, Luke. I think it's time Mom and Dad knew too." After years of hiding my success, I agreed. Perhaps naively, I imagined they might finally see me, truly see me, and acknowledge the path I'd forged despite their indifference. I decided to visit home the following weekend, magazine in hand, ready for a long overdue reckoning. The May evening was unusually warm as I pulled into my parents' driveway. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling around the windows despite the money I'd been providing for maintenance. Matthew's truck was already there, and I could see silhouettes moving behind the living room curtains. I sat in my rental car for several minutes, the Tech Innovator magazine on the passenger seat, its cover, reflecting my face back at me under the headline that celebrated my success. After years of operating in the shadows of my family's awareness, I was about to step into the light. The mixture of anticipation and dread made my heart race. Mom opened the door before I could knock her smile tight, with the effort of pretending everything was normal. "Luke, what a nice surprise. Matthew didn't tell us you were coming." The living room was exactly as I remembered, Matthew's trophies still prominently displayed, despite their tarnished photos of his glory days yellowing with age. Dad sat in his recliner, the arthritis in his hands more pronounced than during my last visit. "Son," he acknowledged with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you." Everything okay with that computer job of yours?" The dismissive reference to my computer job as if I were still tinkering in a basement, rather than running a multi-million-dollar technology company, immediately set my teeth on edge. Matthew, sitting tensely on the couch, caught my eye with a sympathetic grimace. Dinner was a study in familiar dynamics. Mom served my brother double portions without asking while absently passing dishes my way. Dad dominated the conversation with local gossip and complaints about his doctors, pausing occasionally to ask Matthew about the dealership. "Sales picked up this month," Matthew said carefully, "but there's been some restructuring." I knew from our private conversations that restructuring was a euphemism for impending layoffs that would likely include him, but our parents didn't probe further. "You always land on your feet," Dad said confidently. "Natural talent shows through no matter what." I waited for an opening, some natural segue to introduce my news, but the conversation flowed around me as if I were merely a piece of furniture. Finally, when Mom began clearing dishes, I placed the magazine on the table. "I wanted to share something with you," I said, sliding it toward the center where the cover was clearly visible. "I was featured in this month's Tech Innovator." Mom glanced at it while stacking plates. "That's nice, honey." "It's not just a mention," I pressed. "It's the cover story, about my company and our recent developments in financial security." Dad picked up the magazine, squinting at the cover without his reading glasses. Technology stuff." He set it back down without opening it. Matthew interjected. "Luke's company was acquired for over $70 million last year. He's revolutionizing how banks protect customer data." A brief silence followed quickly, filled by Mom's nervous laugh. "Well, computers were always your little hobby, weren't they?" "It's not a hobby, Mom. It's one of the fastest-growing financial technology companies in the country. We have offices in 3 countries." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "All that computer mumbo-jumbo. Never understood the appeal when you could be doing something real." "Real," I echoed, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. "What exactly would qualify as real to you?" "You know, working with your hands. Meeting actual people. Like what your brother does, he sells cars to families, helps them make important decisions. Makes a real difference." Matthew stared at the table, visibly uncomfortable. "And my work isn't real. Creating systems that protect millions of people's financial information isn't making a difference." Mom patted my hand condescendingly. "Everyone contributes in their own little way, Luke. Not everyone can be out front like Matthew." Something in me snapped, a taut wire that had been stretching for decades, finally breaking under strain. Out front, Matthew hasn't been out front in anything since college. The dealership is failing. He's been on the verge of losing his job for months. Dad's face flushed with anger. "Now you listen here." "No, you listen," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "For 32 years I've listened to you praise Matthew while dismissing everything I've accomplished. I've endured your comparisons, your indifference, your complete failure to recognize anything of value in me." "That's not true," Mom protested weakly. "We've always been proud of both our boys." "Really, name one of my accomplishments that you celebrated. One time you put my achievements on display like Matthew's trophies. One instance where you didn't immediately pivot the conversation back to him." Their silence was damning. Dad recovered first, his expression hardening. "You've always had a chip on your shoulder. Always been jealous of your brother's natural gifts. The difference is Matthew doesn't have to boast about his successes." I laughed bitterly. "His successes, Dad. Matthew hasn't been successful by your definition since his knee injury 13 years ago. The perfect son you've been praising has been struggling for years, while I've been the one actually succeeding." "Now you're just being cruel," Mom said, tears forming. "Your brother has supported us when we needed it most. When your father couldn't work full-time anymore, when the medical bills piled up, Matthew stepped up. What have you contributed except occasional visits and criticism?" The irony of her question was so acute, it was almost physically painful. I looked at Matthew, silently questioning whether to reveal our arrangement. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, resignation in his eyes. I've contributed approximately $350,000 over the past 8 years, I said quietly. Every monthly check you've received from Matthew came from me. Every bonus that paid for Dad's treatments was money I sent. The renovations to the bathroom for Dad's mobility issues. The car repairs Mom's medication, all me. The stunned silence that followed was absolute. Mom's face drained of color as she looked between Matthew and me, seeking denial. "That's ridiculous," Dad finally sputtered. "Matthew's been taking care of us. Tell him, Matt." Matthew took a deep breath. "It's true. Luke's been sending me money to pass along to you since I started at the dealership. I've been barely staying afloat myself." "But why would you lie to us?" Mom whispered, her voice small and confused. "Because you've never valued anything I've done," I exploded, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. "Because no matter what I achieved, it was never good enough compared to Matthew's mediocrity. Because I knew that even if I handed you a check directly, you'd find a way to diminish it while praising him for something insignificant." In the same breath, Dad's face darkened with anger. "Now you listen here, young man. We've supported you your entire life." "No, you tolerated me. There's a difference. We gave you everything you needed," Mom insisted. "Except what I actually needed: your attention, your recognition, your pride." I stood up, unable to remain seated with the energy coursing through me. "Do you have any idea what it was like growing up as your afterthought? Having every achievement ignored while Matthew got praised for simply existing?" "You're exaggerating," Dad dismissed. "You always were too sensitive." "Am I? When I won the state science competition, you missed it for Matthew's regular season game. When I got a full scholarship to MIT, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, you were more concerned about Matthew's knee rehabilitation. When I sold my first company at 26, you were celebrating Matthew's assistant manager position at a failing car dealership." "We didn't know about your company," Mom said defensively. "Because you never asked. You never showed any interest in my life beyond perfunctory questions that you barely waited for me to answer before turning the conversation back to Matthew." Dad's expression hardened into the dismissive look I'd known my entire life. "Even with all your fancy success, you'll never be as good as your brother. Money doesn't make character, son." Those words, the same ones that had cut me countless times throughout my childhood, finally pushed me past my breaking point. "Then tell him to pay all the bills," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I'm not sending money anymore. Let your golden child, with all his character, figure out how to cover Dad's treatments and the mortgage and Mom's heart medication." Mom gasped. "What money? We never received a single dollar from you directly. It all came from Matthew. He's the one who's been supporting us." "Are you seriously?" I stopped, incredulous at her ability to maintain the fiction even now. "Matthew, tell them exactly how much money you've actually given them versus what I've provided." Matthew looked miserable but spoke firmly. "Everything I've given you since Dad's first surgery has come from Luke. The monthly checks, the extra for emergencies, all of it. The dealership has been struggling for years. I've barely been able to support myself, let alone you." "But the bonuses you mentioned, your promotion," Mom stammered. "There were no bonuses, no promotion. I've been at risk of losing my job for the past year. I've been in and out of rehab for drinking. The only reason I've appeared successful is because of Luke." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad stared at Matthew, as if seeing a stranger, while Mom's eyes filled with tears of confusion and betrayal. "Why would you lie to us all these years?" Dad finally asked. But he was looking at Matthew, not me, still directing his questions to his preferred son. "Because it was easier than admitting I'd failed to live up to your impossible expectations," Matthew answered, his voice strained but steady. "Because Luke offered a way for me to still be the son you wanted me to be, even though I couldn't do it on my own." "And why would you hide your support?" Mom asked me, finally acknowledging my role. "Because nothing I ever did was good enough for you," I replied simply. "Because I knew that even if I handed you checks personally, you'd find a way to credit Matthew for it or diminish its importance." because I was tired of begging for recognition that should have been freely given. Dad struggled to his feet, arthritis making the movement painful. So this whole visit is just to throw your success in our faces, to punish us because you think we weren't attentive enough to your childhood accomplishments. Sounds like the tantrum of someone who has money but no maturity. His dismissal, so familiar, so predictable, washed over me differently this time. Instead of pain, I felt something close to pity. He would never see me, never truly acknowledge my worth, because doing so would require recognizing how profoundly he had failed as a father. "This visit was a mistake," I said quietly. "I actually thought that maybe just once you might be proud of what I've accomplished, that you might finally see me." "We've always seen you," Mom protested weakly. "No, you've seen what you wanted to see, a lesser version of Matthew, a backup plan. Never me. I picked up the magazine in my jacket. I'm done financing this family's delusions. The money stops now." Matthew stood as well. "Luke, wait." I expected him to try to moderate, to smooth things over, as he often had during family conflicts. Instead, he surprised me. "They need to hear this," he said firmly. "All of it. They need to understand what they've done to both of us." He turned to our parents. "Luke is right. You've been living in a fantasy where I'm still the star athlete with endless potential, and he's just the computer nerd who couldn't make the team. But the reality is he's succeeded beyond anything I ever achieved while I've been barely holding my life together." Dad's face reddened. "You're taking his side now, after everything we've done for you." "It's not about sides," Matthew replied. "It's about truth. And the truth is, you've damaged both your sons with your favoritism. You set me up for failure by making me believe I didn't have to work for anything, that my natural talent would carry me through life. And you hurt Luke by making him feel nothing he did would ever be enough." Mom began sobbing in earnest while Dad sank back into his chair, the wind seemingly knocked from his sails. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because continuing this arrangement is destroying all of us. It's perpetuating a lie that needs to end if any of us are going to heal." With that, I walked out into the warm spring evening, leaving behind the house that had never truly felt like home and the parents who had never fully seen me. Matthew followed me to my car. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't keep living like this, and neither can you." He nodded, understanding passing between us, two survivors of the same dysfunctional system, finally acknowledging the damage done. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised. As I drove away, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. Something fundamental had broken tonight, but perhaps something new could now begin to grow in its place. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents passed in a blur of emotional extremes. I returned to San Francisco and immersed myself in work, extending office hours until colleagues began exchanging concerned glances. By day, I functioned with mechanical precision, but nights brought waves of doubt, anger, and occasionally crushing guilt. Had I been too harsh? Had decades of resentment caused me to exaggerate their failings? These questions haunted me at 3 a.m. as I stared at my ceiling, replaying the confrontation and second-guessing my decision to cut financial ties. Matthew called regularly, providing updates on the deteriorating situation at home. Dad's pride prevented him from acknowledging their financial predicament, while Mom vacillated between tearful phone messages, begging me to reconsider, and angry accusations about my abandonment of family obligations. "They're in denial," Matthew reported during our 3rd week of separation. "Dad keeps saying they'll manage on their own, but they've already missed a mortgage payment. Mom's rationing her heart medication to make it last longer." The news twisted my stomach with guilt, but I held firm. They need to understand the reality of their situation without me as a safety net. And if that reality includes losing their home, or Dad skipping treatments, I had no easy answer. Breaking free from our dysfunctional pattern didn't mean I wanted my parents to suffer. After much deliberation, I established a small emergency fund that Matthew could access for critical medical needs, only with the strict understanding that my involvement remained anonymous. This isn't sustainable, Matthew acknowledged, but it buys us time to figure out next steps. A month after the confrontation, I finally admitted to myself that I needed professional help processing the emotional aftermath. I resumed sessions with Dr. Marshall, who provided a crucial objective perspective. Family systems resist change, he explained during our first renewed session. Your parents are experiencing not just financial strain, but an identity crisis. Their narrative about who they are as parents and who their sons are has been forcibly rewritten. So I should feel sorry for them, I asked, bitterly. No, but understanding the magnitude of disruption might help you navigate what comes next. You've shattered their perception of reality, a necessary step toward potential healing but traumatic nonetheless. The therapy sessions provided a structured space to examine my own contribution to our family dysfunction. Yes, my parents had established the damaging pattern of favoritism, but I had perpetuated it through my secretive financial arrangement. Rather than confronting the issue years earlier, I'd chosen a path that allowed me to simultaneously support and punish them, a reflection of my own unresolved anger and lingering need for validation. 6 months of no direct contact with my parents stretched into 8. Matthew reported that they had downsized to a smaller apartment, with Dad taking a part-time consulting position despite his health limitations. Pride continued to prevent them from reaching out directly, though Mom occasionally asked Matthew roundabout questions about my well-being. Meanwhile, I focused intensely on my own healing process. I diversified my life beyond work, joining a rock-climbing gym and a local photography club activities I'd always been interested in but had never prioritized. I began dating again, cautiously exploring connections with people who had no knowledge of my family baggage. As the 1-year anniversary of our confrontation approached, an unexpected call from Matthew disrupted my carefully reconstructed routine. "I'm in rehab," he said without preamble. 30 days inpatient. I hit bottom, Luke. Lost my job, wrapped my truck around a tree. Nobody hurt except my pride, but it was the wake-up call I needed. My chest tightened with concern. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" "Part of recovery is doing it for yourself, not leaning on others to save you. That's been my pattern too long." His voice sounded different, steadier, more self-aware. "But I'm calling now because I'd like to see you when I get out. There are things we need to talk about face to face." 3 weeks later, I flew to Boston and drove to the rehabilitation center, a serene compound of brick buildings surrounded by expansive lawns. Matthew looked simultaneously older and healthier than I'd ever seen him, thinner, with clear eyes and deliberate movements that suggested a new mindfulness. We walked the grounds, initially exchanging awkward updates about our lives. Gradually, the conversation shifted to deeper territory. "I've been doing family systems work here," he explained. "Understanding how our parents shaped both of us, but also how we perpetuated damaging patterns. I've been doing similar work in therapy," I admitted. "I owe you an apology," Matthew said, stopping to face me directly. "I knew how they treated you growing up. I saw it happening and I did nothing. Worse, I accepted the benefits of their favoritism without questioning the cost to you." His directness surprised me. "You were a kid too, Matthew. It wasn't your responsibility to correct our parents' behavior. Maybe not when we were children, but as adults, I happily played along with your financial arrangement because it gave me their approval without requiring actual achievement. I used you, Luke. That's on me, not them." His accountability was unexpected and oddly moving. For the first time, I felt truly seen by a family member, my experience validated without defensiveness or deflection. "I participated in that dynamic too," I acknowledged. "I could have been honest with them years ago. Instead, I chose a path that let me feel superior, while still seeking their approval from a safe distance." This mutual recognition marked a turning point in our relationship. We spent the next 2 days engaged in honest conversations about our shared past and the possibility of a healthier future. Matthew was particularly insistent that our parents needed to be part of this healing process. "They're struggling, Luke. not just financially but with their entire identity. Dad's health is worse and Mom seems lost. They made terrible mistakes as parents, but they're still our parents. I'm not ready to let them back into my life, I said firmly. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened. I'm suggesting that maybe with proper boundaries and professional support we could begin a conversation about building something new. I returned to San Francisco with a promise to consider his suggestion. 2 months later, after extensive preparation with Dr. Marshall, I agreed to a carefully structured family meeting with a trained therapist present. The session would take place on neutral territory, a clinical office in Boston with clear boundaries, and a professional mediator. The meeting was as difficult as I'd anticipated. Dad entered defensively, his posture rigid despite the physical pain evident in his movements. Mom appeared smaller somehow, her confident maternal demeanor replaced by nervous uncertainty. The family therapist, Dr. Chen, established ground rules immediately: no interrupting, no dismissing others' experiences, no absolutes like always or never. Each person would have uninterrupted time to express their perspective. When my turn came, I spoke from prepared notes to ensure I covered everything essential without being derailed by emotion. For most of my life, I felt invisible in our family. My achievements were ignored or minimized, while Matthew received praise for minimal effort. This created a deep wound that I've carried into adulthood, a persistent belief that nothing I do will ever be enough. My financial support over the years was simultaneously an act of familial duty and a way to prove my worth while protecting myself from your dismissal. I recognize now that this arrangement was unhealthy for everyone involved. Mom wiped tears silently while Dad stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. When they spoke, their responses revealed how differently we had experienced the same family history. "We never meant to make you feel less important," Mom insisted. "Matthew needed more attention because sports were his only strength while you excelled at everything naturally. We thought you were fine on your own." Dad's response was more difficult to hear. "Parents aren't perfect, Luke. We did our best with what we knew at the time. If you choose to focus on perceived slights from 20 years ago rather than moving forward, that's your choice." His half-hearted acknowledgement fell far short of the accountability I'd hoped for. Dr. Chen intervened, guiding him to respond to the specific experiences I'd shared rather than generalizing or deflecting. Dad tried again with minimal improvement. "I'm sorry you felt overlooked. That wasn't our intention." The familiar pattern of minimizing my experience and centering their intentions rather than impacts threatened to derail the entire process. Matthew surprisingly stepped in. "Dad, Mom, this isn't about intentions. Luke isn't describing a feeling or perception, he's describing actual events that happened. I was there. I saw how differently you treated us. Saying, 'We're sorry you felt that way,' isn't acknowledging what actually occurred." His advocacy, so different from the conflict-avoidant brother I'd grown up with, shifted something in the room. Mom broke down completely, admitting through tears that she had always struggled to connect with me, finding my intelligence intimidating, and Matthew's straightforward personality more accessible. Dad remained more resistant, acknowledging specific incidents when pressed, but maintaining that all parents have favorites sometimes, and we were making too big a deal of normal family dynamics. By the end of the 3-hour session, we had made minimal progress toward genuine reconciliation. Dr. Chen suggested a series of additional family sessions, but I left feeling that while my parents might eventually acknowledge certain behaviors, they might never truly understand the depth of their impact. Healing doesn't require their full understanding. Dr. Marshall reminded me when I reported back. You can establish a new relationship with appropriate boundaries, whether or not they ever completely recognize the past harm. Over the next year, I maintained limited, structured contact with my parents, monthly phone calls with clear time limits, and occasional supervised family sessions when I visited Boston. I established firm boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss, and I made it clear that any financial support would be provided directly by me with explicit acknowledgement of its source. The relationship remained strained, particularly with Dad, who never fully abandoned his defensive posture. Mom made more genuine efforts, occasionally sending articles about technology, with notes saying she was trying to understand my world better. These small gestures, while imperfect, represented more interest than she'd shown in my first 30 years combined. The most profound healing occurred between Matthew and me. As he maintained his sobriety and rebuilt his life, eventually finding work as a substance abuse counselor, we developed a friendship that had never been possible under our parents' influence. The competitive dynamic that had defined our childhood dissolved, replaced by mutual respect and genuine support. 2 years after the confrontation, my personal and professional lives had transformed. My company continued to expand globally, and I had begun a promising relationship with Elise, a marine biologist whose straightforward nature and emotional intelligence provided a healthy contrast to my family's dysfunction. Most importantly, I had stopped measuring my worth through external validation, particularly my parents' approval. Matthew and I started a foundation providing scholarships and mentoring for overlooked students with technical aptitude, kids, like I had been, whose talents didn't fit conventional definitions of success. We named it after Mrs. Whitaker, the librarian who had first recognized my potential when my family couldn't see it. During a foundation event in Boston, Matthew surprised me by addressing the audience. My brother and I grew up in the same house but had vastly different childhoods, he began. I was celebrated for natural talents that eventually faded, while he was overlooked despite extraordinary abilities that have changed the world. Our story is a reminder that potential comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest kids in the room have the loudest impact on the future. His words spoken publicly provided a validation that all those years of therapy hadn't fully achieved. It wasn't about being declared better than my brother. It was about finally being seen clearly without comparison or qualification. That night, as we shared dinner after the event, Matthew asked, "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive them?" I considered the question carefully. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right framework. I've accepted who they are and the limitations of what our relationship can be. I've stopped expecting them to become different people or give me what they're not capable of giving. That sounds like forgiveness to me, he observed. Perhaps he was right. The anger that had fueled me for decades had gradually transformed into something more complex, a melancholy acceptance of imperfect parents, and the understanding that I could build a fulfilling life without their validation. The funny thing is, I admitted letting go of needing their approval finally allowed me to see them as people, not just parents who failed me. They're flawed humans who did their best with the emotional tools they had, which weren't many. Matthew nodded. Liberation through lowered expectations. We laughed together, a genuine healing sound that would have been impossible in the shadow of our old family dynamic. 2 years after the confrontation that changed everything, my life bears little resemblance to the carefully constructed facade I maintained for so long. I've built a reality based on authenticity, rather than approval, seeking a shift that has transformed every aspect of my existence. Professionally, my company continues to thrive now with a focus on democratizing financial security tools for underserved communities. The work satisfies something deeper than my ego. It provides tangible evidence that overlooked potential, when finally recognized, can change countless lives. Personally, my relationship with Elise has evolved into a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. Unlike previous relationships damaged by my secretiveness about family, Elise knows my full history and has witnessed my ongoing journey toward healing. Her straightforward nature helps ground me when old patterns of thinking threaten to resurface. My contact with my parents remains limited but is no longer defined by resentment or hidden agendas. We speak monthly with conversations that acknowledge our complicated history without constantly revisiting it. Dad still struggles with fully recognizing his role in our family dysfunction, occasionally lapsing into defensive justifications when difficult topics arise. Mom has made more significant progress recently, sending me a letter that contained perhaps the most honest acknowledgement she's ever offered. "I didn't know how to be the mother you needed," she wrote. "Your intelligence intimidated me, and I gravitated toward what was familiar and comfortable, Matthew's world of sports and simple achievements I could understand. It wasn't fair to you, and I'm truly sorry for the pain that caused. These words, while arriving decades late, provided a measure of peace I hadn't realized I still sought. Not because they changed the past, but because they confirmed I hadn't imagined it. The most profound transformation has occurred in my relationship with Matthew. After completing his rehabilitation program, he discovered a genuine calling as a substance abuse counselor, using his experiences to help others navigate their own recovery journeys. His natural charisma, once channeled into sports and social status, now serves a deeper purpose in connecting with clients who respond to his authenticity. We speak weekly and collaborate regularly on the Whitaker Foundation, which has now provided technical education opportunities to over 100 students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Working alongside my brother as equals rather than competitors has healed wounds I thought would remain forever raw. Last month, Matthew reached his 1-year sobriety milestone. I flew to Boston to attend his celebration meeting, watching with profound pride as he received his chip and spoke honestly about his journey. He acknowledged how our parents' expectations had shaped his self-destructive patterns, and how breaking free from those expectations had been essential to his recovery. "I spent 30 years trying to be the person they thought I should be," he told the group. "Turns out I'm much better at being the person I actually am." The wisdom in his words resonated deeply with my own experience. For decades, I had defined myself in opposition to their dismissal, achieving partly to prove them wrong, arranging my financial support to maintain control while seeking validation. Every action, whether conforming to their expectations or rebelling against them, had still been about them. True freedom came only when I began making choices based on my own values, rather than in reaction to theirs. The parent I needed wasn't going to suddenly emerge from either of them. I had to learn to parent myself to provide the recognition and validation I had always sought externally. This process of self-parenting has been among the most challenging and rewarding aspects of my healing journey. I've learned to celebrate my own achievements without waiting for external validation. I've practiced speaking to myself with the kindness and encouragement I would offer a child in my care, rather than the harsh internal criticism I'd internalized from years of feeling inadequate. The foundation Matthew and I established has become an unexpected source of healing for both of us. Working with young people who remind me of my younger self has allowed me to channel my experiences into something constructive rather than remaining trapped in resentment. Seeing these students receive the recognition and support I lacked has been profoundly therapeutic. During a recent foundation event, a shy 16-year-old girl approached me after my presentation. "My parents think computers are a waste of time," she confided. "They want me to focus on real subjects that will get me a normal job." Her words could have come directly from my own adolescent experience. Instead of simply offering encouragement, I shared a portion of my story with her. "People who don't understand your passion may never fully see its value," I told her. "But that doesn't diminish what you're creating or who you're becoming. The validation you're seeking might not come from the sources you expect, but I promise it will come." The next day, I authorized a special scholarship for her and arranged mentorship with one of our partner companies. Her path may mirror mine in some ways, but perhaps with the support our foundation provides, she won't have to wait decades for recognition of her gifts. This experience crystallized an insight that has become central to my healing. We cannot change our past, but we can transform how it shapes our future. The pain of being overlooked as a child will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines my present or determines my choices. My parents' inability to see my worth was never about my actual value. It reflected their limitations, not mine. This understanding has freed me from the exhausting cycle of seeking validation from people constitutionally incapable of providing it. I've learned that recognition matters far less than self-belief, and external validation pales in comparison to living authentically. As I reflect on this journey from invisible son to self-actualized adult, I recognize that true healing wasn't about confrontation or revenge or even receiving long overdue acknowledgement. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my own life, stepping out of the shadows of comparison and into the light of self-acceptance. If you've ever felt overlooked or undervalued by the people who should have been your greatest supporters, know that your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it. The validation you seek may never come from the sources you expect, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve it or won't find it elsewhere. Have you experienced something similar in your own family? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are enough exactly as they are. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of self-care is learning to be the person who finally sees your own worth.